Hello, everyone. Now that we have the space all filled, welcome Joe Petrowski from the Web3 Foundation, and as a lot of you may know, Dakota and Gabe from InvArch Tinkernet, and of course to all of you, the broader Sama community in our audience today, to the second episode of Tinker Talks. My name is AJ. I'm the social media manager here at InvArch Network, and I'll be moderating this Twitter space. So to give a rundown of this Twitter space today, we'll start off with introductions from our speakers today. Then we'll go through a series of questions for both Joe and Dakota and Gabe, and in which they'll answer respectively. From there, approaching the end of the Twitter space, we will open up the floor to our audience to give them the opportunity to ask questions they may have and would like to ask of either Joe, Dakota, and Gabe, if such questions warrant for answers from both of them. And to the end, to end off the space, we'll have Joe, Dakota, and Gabe give their final statements as a send-off to our awesome audience here with us today. So let's begin. Joe, if you don't mind, if you could tell us more about yourself, what you do at the Web3 Foundation, and we'd love to hear that.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm Joe. I've been working on Polkadot for the last 4 years. Before that, did some stuff with satellite launch and then tried to be a professional cyclist. Not very successfully, but gave it a shot anyway. And then, came into the blockchain stuff after that. I worked on, I guess, a few different things on Polkadot, but for now, I'm leading the Common Good Parachains team. So mostly focused on statement and state line and then some other new stuff that we have rolling out over the next few months.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. And then, as many of you may know, I'm Dakota. I just want to side note. I thought it was really interesting the cyclist comment. I had prior aspirations in the past, went really hard for it, and then next thing I know, I was like, nah. And now here I am in Web3. Dakota Barnett, founder of InvArch. Lover of the Polkadot ecosystem, true believer of the tech stack and everything that we are building, and really appreciative for, like Joe, many of the individuals over at Parity and the Web3 Foundation who have over the years been kind of building up this whole foundation so that developers like ourselves could then come in and start to build that next foundation, the next layer on top of it all. Founder of InvArch. InvArch is a very advanced. It's a new type of layer one, focused on providing a foundation for the creator economy with a specific focus on ownership. So we have our NFT primitives, which come jam-packed with a lot of really powerful features, from the possibility for really advanced multi-sig solutions, to just again Git level composability integrations. So doing everything that we can to bring the proper primitives into not just our ecosystem, but to Web3 that we see are needed to support the creator economy, primitives that are powerful enough, flexible enough to be used to build, but then also be used to track different economic systems and models, whether it's allocating different rights of ownership over to different individuals, or even tracking tethered ownership and streamlining royalties based off of multiple, let's say, generations of derivative works and all that jazz. So with all of that, we're really, really big on being active participants in this multi-chain future, not necessarily, serving as a catch-all for everything, but the way we see it is providing these really powerful primitives that kind of plug into everything, and then in combination with a lot of other stuff in the ecosystem, a lot of other powerful protocols, build some really, really awesome dApps. So that's me, and I'll let Gabe go ahead and introduce himself.
Hey, I'm Gabe. I'm a co-founder of InvArch. I am focused in the tech. I'm the head of development, and I'm what you would call a serial blockchain builder. Deployed Tinkernet, and on the same batch, we deployed a little wacky parachain called GM, and focused on getting attention and governance over there. So I think that's really a really interesting point to bring. That's why I mentioned it. We've been focusing a lot in bringing people into governance and into other parachains to get a broader knowledge of how these complex systems are managed. And then, of course, in Tinkernet, we build these primitives that can also be used for governance and can get extremely complex. Can do a lot of extremely interesting things without having to deploy your own parachain.
It's awesome. Thank you to our speakers for those introductions. Now let's move on to the question series of the Twitter space. So first, let's start off with our guest, Joe. Would you mind explaining a bit about how governance currently works on Polkadot and what are the differences between how things are now and with Gov 2?
Yeah, so as a lot of people know, we're probably kind of right on the cusp of this like governance version 1 and version 2, at least on Kusama. So the version 2 stuff is rolling out kind of right now. So the version 1 that we launched with and that we've been using since Genesis, it's a tricameral model. So there's two on-chain bodies. One is called the council, the other is the technical committee, and then there's like the third body would just be everybody. So anybody who's a dot holder. And so like basically every decision can go through a referendum. So anybody, it's totally permissionless, like anybody can make a proposal. It will eventually go to referendum, be voted on, and if it passes a referendum, then it would be enacted by the system. And then the council and technical committee kind of changed some of the parameters of how those referenda happen. So the council can kind of change the threshold that's required to actually pass one of these referenda. And the technical committee, they can't really make any proposals themselves, but they can speed up the voting period and the enactment period. So they can make something happen sooner than it otherwise would. So that's like the overall, there's a lot of rabbit holes that you can go in there about what a proposal technically is, how it gets enacted by the chain itself. But broadly speaking, you have these three bodies. All the decisions have to go to a referendum, and the council and the technical committee can kind of make things happen a little bit easier or faster. It was, I think, like a really good way to launch, and we certainly learned a lot by doing it. But obviously introduces a few points of centralization, namely like who is actually on this council and who is on the technical committee. They're pretty small groups, and it's actually like a bit more efficient to have them be small because when you have to get something to pass like 2/3 with the council or something, it's a lot easier to get 2/3 of a small number of people to vote. So yeah, I mean, like it was kind of okay as a bootstrapping mechanism, but obviously we want to decentralize that a bit more and put the system like fully in the hands of the token holders. The council was actually elected, so like by the token holders, it just didn't get a lot of participation, so there wasn't a lot of turnover in the council. And yeah, I think some people kind of felt like it was difficult to get certain things through the council. I'm a counselor on Polkadot, not on Kusama, but I know you're kind of expected to see a lot of different perspectives. Like you get treasury proposals for all sorts of different things, like to develop technical projects or to like host events for Polkadot, like to do side events to Polkadot Decoded and stuff. You get technical proposals like, should we open these HRMP channels? Should we do a runtime upgrade? And your attention is kind of like pulled across a huge breadth of areas, and it's hard to do a good job across all of them. So one of the things that governance version 2 does is it splits things up into a lot of different tracks. So rather than just having like a governance origin, there are like, I don't even know how many origins, probably like 20 origins off the bat in governance version 2. But kind of like, yeah, to back up from that a little bit, governance version 2, it gets rid of this council, and it does have some on-chain collectives, but they have different powers. They're more similar to the technical committee. They're much bigger. We expect a much broader membership in some of these on-chain bodies than what's in the technical committee now. So yeah, hopefully like a lot more decentralized. We also like, you can kind of think of the council as this like vote mapping, right? Like you have, tens of thousands of token holders, and they've chosen this like fixed size council of 13. Either, I mean, their accounts, some of them are individuals, some of them are organizations. They've kind of chosen these 13 individuals or like accounts to have like a larger amount of power in the system than others. But it's like a fixed mapping from a virtually unlimited number of accounts down to 13. And what we've really tried to do in governance version 2 is make delegation a lot smoother. So you can delegate to somebody else, and we kind of expect like a lot of people to delegate to some other. So you might have somebody who is well respected in the ecosystem, and a lot of people delegate their votes to them. So we still have like the system where you can take a large number of opinions and map them to a smaller set, which is obviously a lot more helpful for like the efficiency of getting those token holders represented. Not everybody wants to participate in every single vote, but they can still delegate their votes to people that they trust to represent them. So, but we don't. It's not like it's fixed to a number like 13 or 19 or whatever. It's totally dynamic. So, and you don't have to delegate your votes. If you want to vote in every referendum, then you're totally free to. And then like about the different tracks, like, yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of different like treasury spending tracks. There's technical tracks like about runtime upgrades. And then there's a bunch of like management tracks about like, we're gonna probably launch like a bridge soon. So yeah, there could be like kind of like a bridge management collective that would have kind of like some power in the bridge to do some stuff there. Um, uh, yeah, so like you can actually delegate to different accounts for different tracks. So you could imagine like, well, I kind of trust this person or individual to evaluate treasury spending proposals. So I'm going to delegate to them for the treasury track. But I trust these engineers to to recommend like which runtime upgrades should happen. So I'm going to delegate my runtime upgrade votes to this group of engineers or something, and it just gives like a lot more granularity into how you express your preference. And you might just decide not to delegate some track. So like, I'm like an engineer, I could decide, I'm going to make the engineering track decisions on my own. But for the treasury proposals, I don't want to pay attention to every single one, so I'm going to delegate that to somebody else. So yeah, I probably went on too long about that, but yeah, I can take some questions and pause here.
No, I personally like I love that. Like governance is my jam. The like that past career, like I alluded to earlier, I was like I really tried to go for. It was for some reason in my head, I really wanted to be like president of the United States for a long time in my life, and like really went into it, which is how I got into. I used to work in government, used to work for a former governor here in the States, and then ironically, once I got in there, I was like, this is so inefficient, I hate it. Um, but I love all this. Like, and I'm really like one of the things I just want to say that I'm really excited about, like a big fan of, is the ability to just efficiently delegate votes, depending on like the track. I think I think that's amazing. I was there. I was in New York City at Dakota. So like I didn't see it live. It was being streamed. But I remember the keynote, Gavin Wood's keynote address when he introduced Gov2, and the moment when he had like brought up the fact delegating votes. To some it might seem like a simple thing, but to me it was just so refreshing and exciting to hear, because I feel like that's something like I really love to view Web3, and what we're doing, like really what you guys are doing. But for those who are taking governance seriously, I really like to see this almost as like an experiment, in a way, of like creating better systems than the ones that we see in, it's not even Web2, it's just in our institutions today. So the concept of delegating votes, to me, like if that could be applied, like I love seeing it. But like it's exciting because if that concept could be applied like more and throughout like the real world, I really feel like those types of solutions would just make governance for everyone, a lot more effective and also efficient, but mostly effective. People getting proper representation, because the problem is usually, at least here, because you guys are solving this problem, which is really important. Of like, there's voter turnouts, there's bandwidth, there's human bandwidth, and there's also the fact that people aren't going to be they're not going to be experts in every matter, nor will they. There's a possibility they might not even care about certain things. It's just not the jam. And I feel you guys really effectively solve at least the ability for those who understand or able identify what interests them, what doesn't, or what they do care about, but identify people who can represent them accurately. I think it's really awesome, because taking then away from what you guys are solving, if something like that could be applied in the real world, I feel like there are inevitable things these, at least in the US, like the two-party system, is an inevitable thing. There's this thing called Divergence Law in political science that kind of just goes deep into it. But the thing is, that's the system that we have here, and it's created this a very an absolute type of mindset in our democracy, where it's a this or that. And so you vote for this or that. It's an all or nothing. You could agree with one individual on 60% of of the topics, and then the other person 40%. But you vote for the one, and they're going to represent you on 60% of the things that you agree with and 40% of the things that you don't. And that's just how the system works today. With something like this, voters would be able to have their true voices, and just the ability to be more accurately represented would be amazing. Although then again, I'm a bit of a futurist, and I like to imagine a world run on blockchain one day. But I think it's really awesome, Jay. So thank you for sharing all that.
Yes, thank you. Now, next question for the InvArch team. InvArch features advanced NFT primitives. However, could you please explain what these have to do with governance and how InvArch is involved in governance?
I'll kick it off, then I'll pass over to Gabe, because there's I think there's something he's been working on with multisig that's going to be really, really awesome. But so InvArch, it's kind of funny, because yes, at the core of it all, and technically speaking, these are NFT primitives that really comprise the core of our network, the core of its functionality. I like to kind of view these primitives almost pardon the reference, but almost kind of like stem cells of Web3, and regarding what they can do. They're very, very powerful and flexible when it comes to setting up, from a philosophical sense, any type of system that involves collaboration, joint ownership, anything that has to do with rights. They're able to accommodate all of these different needs, all these different systems, and serve as building blocks to build, whether it's a DAO with a governance framework, or to actually just build out assets like a music album. But then that music album attached to it has the ability, again, all these things are optional, but it has the ability pegged to it to have this very advanced multi-sig functionality built into it. But beyond that, it's because, and for those who don't know, it's an important thing to understand about our NFT primitives is, on one hand, they can, anything that you can do with files or with folders and files on your computer, you can do with these primitives. They completely, in every way, emulate the same standard of composability as, say, Git. So this tree file structure. It's really awesome. I like to think it doesn't get any more composable than that, but I'll never say never. But it really flexible. But attached to them, taking things a step further, is we have these multi-class fungible tokens. We just call them IP tokens. And what that means is, the world is familiar with, or rather more experimenting with now, refungibility. So you have an NFT, and this could be art, this could be music, whatever creative works. And you have these tokens that are pegged to it, and they fractionalize it in some way, whether it's the ownership over it, which is usually they'll use it to create a form of liquidity in certain DeFi protocols and all this stuff. But the thing here is it's a one size fits all. So you pay these tokens, and whatever it is, if it's governance, transactions, rights, this token does everything. Whereas with InvArch, with our primitives, with Tinkernet, as they're live now, we have multi-class fungible tokens. So it's the ability for people to establish different bodies, different unique bodies, separated from one another, of fungible tokens that are all pegged to the same non-fungible asset. And the purpose for this is so that you can customize the utility of each of these classes. So, for example, you can have one class that does represent ownership. You can have one class that represents commercial rights, one class of tokens that extend temporary, like rental rights or lease rights. You can have a class of token that extends full use rights. And you can have class of tokens that completely different from that aspect. These serve as experience points, which are non-transferable once they are sent to like an individual and they establish a form of in NFT or in DAO level tracking. These are NFT primitives. So to answer the question, like what does InvArch have to do with governance, is that by default, our NFT primitives are able to just act as DAOs, DAOs that come packed with just very, very powerful functionality. But yeah, I'll pass off to Gabe if you want to add anything in there. Maybe
Yeah. So
multi-sig side.
Yeah. So before we even get into that, it's important to understand like what governance, how governance works in the relay chains, but at least right now, and what we can do that's kind of similar is in the relays we have the council, for example. And the council is a collective. It's that's a primitive from a ballot that creates this this body where people can join. It can come from many different sources. It's dependent on how you define that in the runtime. But what that does is it defines one body defined on the runtime that has that has its own account and can do can execute specific transactions. What we can do with our InvArch primitives is something similar to that, except instead of one body predefined, we allow users to launch these collectives, these bodies, in real time, dynamically on chain. So these wrap around NFTs, but they also allow for a complete DAO governance system that gets very customizable. But the gist of it is this is a DAO or a governance body launcher that anyone can start using. Anyone can launch and can onboard people in, and then these accounts, they are not unlike how the council works, for example. These accounts, they are not the permissions, they're not defined also in the runtime. Like how you can, for example, say that the council will have pseudo powers, for example. What we do is we have these accounts that act just like user accounts. You can think of these as contracts that have their own accounts, and these permissions are all customizable in the during the runtime and not predefined. So you could have this group of people that have permissions to do XYZ calls, but don't have permissions to do anything else. You could have this main, this root asset that has permission for everything and 100% voting power. You could also customize the voting weight, or how much power that vote will have in the total supply of votes. So it's a very dynamic way of launching DAOs and governance on chain instead of having to go and build your own chain. And then with XCM, you can connect that to any number of parachains. You can use those to execute calls in different parachains. So that gives us a very powerful DAO launcher that can connect to the Paraverse and execute calls. And then with the multisig, we get into this very dynamic multisig implementation that we built, which is slightly different from Paradig's multisig, where Paradig's multisig is meant to be as efficient as possible. So it doesn't, for example, it doesn't store the call data, it only stores the hash. So users have to manually input, or you have to have a separate off-chain service that stores that and it does all of that for the users. What we do is we embrace the fact that we have this system for multisigs, and this is one of the reasons why we have a parachain, and we don't make those compromises. So we have metadata in everything. We have all these storages for users to build protocols on top of our already existing protocols. So what happens then is you can have metadata in your multisig calls, so that you can then build a UI specific for something that uses that metadata. For example, in GitArch, we can have this metadata that describes that it's using the GitArch protocol, and and that multisig call represents someone merging code. And then on the GitArch tab, we can then render something specifically for that multisig call, knowing that it's a merge. We don't have to render raw call data to show the users what they are voting on. We can actually just show the code that's being merged, because then we allow people to build protocols for their own DAO on this DAO launcher chain.
Truly powerful stuff. Thank you, Dakota and Gabe, for answering that question. Now, back to Joe. I know that there are a lot of third-party services that help facilitate governance discussions. My question is, if those sites were somehow censored, would this inhibit Polkadot's ability to govern?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We haven't actually seen that so far. Like on a technical level, no. Like all of the governance actually happens on chain, which is really powerful on Polkadot. That I think is like just above and beyond what any other chain is doing. It would certainly have an impact. I think it would, like a lot of those third-party services make governance a lot more approachable, because I mean, like you were describing with the multisig, a lot of governance stuff just stores a hash. So it just says like, yeah, we're voting on this hash, and nobody really, like, the reason people know what that hash is because it gets rendered on these third-party services. So it can all be on chain, but it's not as efficient. And yeah, the third-party services are really useful for these like discussion forums and a little bit more like long form discussion rather than chat. And obviously like a lot more accessible too. Like not everybody wants to download a new chat client and talk there. Kind of having these like publicly available third-party services is really useful. So yeah, it would definitely be painful if they were censored, but I would hope that yeah, that's not the type of event that should actually stop Polkadot's ability to govern. And there are like quite a few of them. I mean, like there's PokeAssembly, Subsquare, Subscan, I think Subspace is one. Edgeware, like yeah, I'm sorry if I'm missing if I'm missing your favorite one, but that's kind of the point. Is like I don't even know all of them, so I think like it'd be very unlikely to have all of them be censored. So hopefully that kind of discussion would move somewhere else.
Yeah, I would, in my like opinion, interesting question, but yeah, I would agree. I think it would take like some. I feel like there'd be like some rather alarming global events going on. Like it would be like some clear attack on Web3. If like something to that scale was happening. On one hand, no one's getting harmed, but then also because there's so many different solutions out there, would mean to like try to censor all. It'd be obviously there'd be like a whole big thing, unrealistic. But I'd also argue like regardless, let's say like worst case scenario, I still think that regardless, I think Polkadot is kind of future proofed for this. While whether those third party services are, and mind you, I mean they can only do things as the fact client is prepared for it, but whether or not those third party services are immediately ready, prepared now or not would be the question. But I would say Like there's light clients, there's people can build dApps, there's IPFS, you can host your site on, like there's so many different alternatives and ways to, because of how Polkadot was designed. And again, I really do think it was designed with a strong awareness of future proofing, in my opinion. So like even if like it's like a worst case scenario like that were to occur, I still feel like I mean there's a possibility like that could hypothetically happen, and because of alternative, more sensitive, like resistant ways of just connecting, someone could then just still hop on and connect. You know what I mean? I feel like that would be more of like an RPC like type of thing, but that's, yeah, like as far as like my view of like how could that be censored, you know?
Awesome answers. Thank you. Now, the second question to the InvArch team. InvArch is working on DAO tooling, such as the DAOist CDK. How do you believe you can incorporate concepts of Gov2 in order to improve the CDK even further?
Oh, I would. So one thing, it's like the big thing that I praised prior that's really, really awesome, that like Jed touched on, was the like delegation of votes. That's not like immediate functionality that we have, and I think that is, and obviously it's not like it's not in the queue right now. But I would say like that I think is a very important concept, like that. Obviously not in every single DAO, because there's different DAO models for different types of needs, different types of organizations. It can get pretty. There's a plethora of different models out there, but I would really argue that what is being done now with governance and with Polkadot, like Polkadot is absolutely leading the way on in terms of like decentralization, and again just making really like inclusive and efficient governance models over something that's such as large as a network like Polkadot. So like the big thing that I guess I would be interested in the future would just be diving more down like the delegation rabbit hole, because I think that's a really awesome thing. That's a really important thing that I see Polkadot doing. And if what we're able to provide is like this DAO launcher, and obviously not like for you wouldn't launch a chain with these DAOs, but with these primitives, but for all the other like majority of other organizational needs and models out there, in my opinion, I really think that delegation would be really useful for a lot of different use cases. But I would like to, I was gonna say, I'm really interested in like Joe's thought on that though, really.
Yeah, like I mean, I think it's cool how you guys have designed like interoperability with like Fala and Remark kind of from the ground up, because that's where stuff like smart contracts become really powerful. Like you can define the core primitives in like a palette or something, and just say like, okay, this this API covers 90% of what our users want to do, but there's always going to be somebody out there who's like, yeah, I want to like tinker with this thing, or like I want this really custom privilege or like feature as part of my DAO, and there's no way that a single chain can meet all of those. But if you provide 90% of it in a really like clean, fast, performant way, but then you still have this really clean integration with like a smart contract chain like Fala, then you can actually like let those tinkerers like do whatever they want really, and have that kind of access and customizability on top of what you've built.
See, I actually thank you for bringing that up. One of the things I really like to see, or how I like to view this, is like we could. My bad, I'm kind of rambling right there. I'm thinking about 12 different things at once. So like with a lot of change, earlier on when parachains were rising up in the space, like from day one where there were no parachains, that if you were to ask the question, what's missing, what's not live on Polkadot, then you'd be able to nearly anything, you could answer that with. But now we have many chains on Polkadot and many, many more on Kusama that are onboarded with their focuses. And a lot of them provide, as we've seen, a lot of just the really core functionality that like you might not be able to build everything on any one of these chains, but we saw it as you can nearly build anything when you build in combination with these chains. But like with us though, like they're how we see things, there's just simply just a piece missing. And as we see it, there's just certain ownership structures, a lot of economic models that they're just simply not possible, or not efficiently possible. Let me say it that way, but they don't exist yet. And what we don't aim necessarily to do is come in and be like a catch-all. Like we don't focus on ZK privacy. We don't zero in on DID, and we don't zero in on smart contracts. However, for anyone who has like heard me speak, especially like if I go like speak at a conference, I'll usually tout other projects in our ecosystem, and I will promote those areas and those solutions, even though we're not building them out. But it's because what we build on top of our network, we're also building in combination with those other networks as well. Just because the way that we've kind of understood, we see the vision of things is like there's all these services, but like so there's this big field of things that we see possible, that like we want to make possible, that we want to do, and we just need to. All that's missing is this primitive, and once we plug in this primitive, boom. Now we can connect it with DID solutions. Now we connect our network. We can use, whether it's a smart contract or a fat contract, they can interact with our primitives. They can kind of provide that custom logic here and there that would be preferred by developers. But we see that now as the system where you have, not to dismiss anything new that comes out in the future, of course, but from how we see things right now, mine is a key Oracle solution, I'd say. We have most of the primitives now that are needed to build these multi-chain dApps. And by multi-chain, I don't mean like a dApp. It's the same dApp. Like, I don't know how to explain. So like you have this dApp is deployed on this network and this network and this network, but it's technically like different. Like what we're talking about here is this one dApp, and it's powered by this protocol and by this protocol and by this protocol. That's how we see things. Like, yeah, we're really keen. We're really keen on working with others because they're experts in what they do. They do it. Excuse my language. They do it damn well, and we like to focus on what we do, and we do it well. Gabe does it. He builds fantastically, but we focus on these things, and I don't know if I'd have the bandwidth to build out DID, ZK, privacy, smart contract. God, that's a lot, man.
Awesome. Alrighty, so last questions. We'll start off with Joe. So in your experience, what has been one of the most challenging obstacles when it comes to on-chain governance?
Yeah, so I think like first of all, probably just like the amount of like the way that the referenda queue is set up is that it only takes one at a time. The technical committee can actually like push more referenda or more proposals to referenda at the same time, but like the system by default, it only picks up one proposal at a time and lets it be voted on. And the other part, I would say, is just like general user experience and approachability of it all. And so it's do one at a time, but like the first one, as far as like the referenda queue, only picking up one proposal at a time, yeah, it's quite basic and has been like almost it's made us like a little bit of like victim of success. Like the governance experiment has been really good, and we see a lot of proposals, both from the council and from the community. And when you only do one at a time, and like on Kusama it's every 7 days, on Polkadot it's every 28 days. Like, if you look at Polkadot, I can only do 12 of them per year, and it just makes it really slow. And so, kind of out of like practical necessity, the technical committee gets involved in a lot of stuff that like the initial vision of the technical committee was really supposed to be for like emergency proposals. Like we found a bug, and there's like a security vulnerability or something isn't working, and we need this proposal to be voted on faster than normal. And that's not really how it's been used in practice. It's more like, well, there's 15 proposals sitting there, and we can only do 12 of them a year at the normal pace. So we need to kind of like use a technical committee to get these to a state where they can be voted on in a referendum. So that hasn't really been ideal. And the nice part about governance version 2 is that it addresses that with the same track system. So like there's a treasury spending track, there's like a staking track, there's the upgrade track, and it says that like for the really sensitive things like a runtime upgrade, you can only be voting on one of these at a time. But for something like a treasury proposal, we can vote on like 10 different treasury proposals at the same time. And so that should really like reduce the need for involvement of like these on-chain collectives to get involved and try to speed up the system, because the system should be able to handle a better throughput. So yeah, for sure, like the general throughput of the referenda queue has been a bit of a bottleneck in like actually iterating and developing and using the governance system. And on the user experience side, it's not just governance. Like people who use Polkadot, the staking is more complicated than other systems, or a lot of things users feel are more complicated. I think here it's like we, at least in the design side, we've really taken like a long view of like trying to design things in true Web3 fashion from the ground up and from the beginning. We're not going to do like a governance by multi-sig type of thing for the entire network. Like we really try to do things right from the beginning, and a lot of that means that like the intermediate tooling is just, it hasn't been built yet. So when we do things like, well, we're not going to store the proposal on chain or the discussion on chain, we're just going to store a hash, that's really low level and not approachable, and it relies on people building tooling to connect that hash to more meaningful information that humans would understand. And it just takes time to build the tooling and experiences on top of that to make it more approachable. And I think we've made the decision not to sacrifice system efficiency and throughput and good low-level engineering design in order for like short-term user experience. And so there has been a lot of tooling development, especially in the last year. So I think it's heading in the right direction. It's just, yeah, still more time, and I hope to see a lot more community efforts because one of the cool things about Web3 is that everybody has the guarantee of interacting with the same data, the same logic. So you can build lots of different tools and applications to interact with the same information. It doesn't have to come down like a vertical like it would normally come from an application.
I'm with you on that. Thank you so much, Joe, for sharing your insights and going into what governance is about in the ecosystem.
Because I was always curious, like just from your experience, I'm pulling in my experience and just like old memories from like actual politics, but the patterns kind of apply to everywhere where governance comes about. What like I guess my question is like, I don't know if it's a question or just like a talking point around like voter participation. Like have you guys been happy with, I guess is my question. Have you guys been happy with like voter participation rates? I know it's like quadratic based voting for a lot of things, but I didn't know if like you guys, because I know like staking rate is usually what we look at. But like, since like in my opinion, Polkadot is like the real utility of the network, and I hope people understand is the governance, because governing over this network is going to be, it already is, but increasingly extremely significant. So I didn't know if there were like any thoughts or things like that to share regarding both like voter turnout, but then also like maintaining an educated like voting populace, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so the turnout I think is definitely lower than what people would like, although there have been some of the more controversial referenda where there's been a larger turnout, and that's always interesting to see. I think the overall, like, if you look at the percentages, they can be a little bit misleading because you might see like, okay, this got a 1% participation. Uh, there is quite a bit of the total issuance of Polkadot and Kusama that isn't really like, what's the word, like votable. So like everything that's locked in parachain auctions um, or DOT or KSM that's been teleported or reserve transferred to other parachains. This stuff, or like the DOT and KSM that's in the Polkadot treasury, that's represented in the total issuance, but it's not really accessible for voting. So the actual turnout, like if you consider what's actually like available for voting, it's a little bit higher than what it looks like. It's basically not as bad as it looks. But yeah, we definitely like to see higher turnout uh, from other groups. It's something we've been pushing for and would, yeah, we'd be happy to see. We are actually working on, I don't know if it's been implemented yet, but I know the intention is like that parachains should be able to vote with whatever is locked up for their parachain lease. So hopefully parachains themselves could like act as governing or as like participants in governance and vote with whatever is locked up for their parachain lease.
And like
So
this
yeah.
community, like through proxy, kind of like because if there's like X amount of voting weight, let's say that like this parachain has, but then if that parachain is like truly essentially like run by its community, I think it's really cool. That's really cool. That can it just adds more power to those people through proxy of this, which I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, the idea is to actually be able to split the votes. So, you could have a parachain with like, say, just pick an easy number, like 100,000 KSM or something, and it could choose to actually split its votes because so part of governance version 2 is that it actually takes the turnout into account. So rather than saying a referendum is going to be like 28 days, it says it can last up to 28 days, and then it starts out at day 1 or day 0 with very high passing requirements. So it could say like, okay, it needs, you know, 100% turnout with over 50% approval in order to pass at the beginning, but those numbers gradually decrease. So by the middle, it might say like, okay, we only need 20% turnout with 70% approval of the 20% that's turned out in order to pass. And so these get like a little bit more relaxed as you approach the end of it. And so if it's passing for some amount of time before the end, it could end early. And so since this takes the actual turnout into account, the parachain would want to say like, well, we're representing with, all of our votes, but like we want to actually split these. Some of these are in favor and some of them are against. So you could have your parachain with like 100 KSM, and I could say, okay, I want 70% of this KSM is in favor, 30% is against, and it will actually cast those as two separate votes from the same account.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I'd be pretty excited for that. That's really cool. I like it too, and I remember now because I remember the two graphs that were up during that presentation. But yeah, it's like I like this because like it makes it really it's almost like it makes participation scalable. And it's like the factors of there's time, how long does this process take? There's turnout, and how many people have voted, and there's obviously like what their votes are indicating. But I really like the fact that it's really interesting. It's very unique. But making this like scaling system, I think that's really cool.
Thank you so much for that awesome insights. And for the last question for the InvArch team, governance gets complex and usually involves multiple unique bodies working together. So how does InvArch accommodate these aspects of governance in its solutions?
Well, one of the things, I guess, in the same sense, mind you, these are different layers of elements. There's bit finicky how you have to build them. But one of the really cool things here, so in the same sense of what Joe was talking about with governance, like there's these different tracks. Like the importance here is like in a real organization, right? Whether this is it's a business or school or whatever, there is it's in the word organization. There's a structure here. There's typically different bodies that are focused on different fields or topics or matters. You know what I mean? Like you have your finance department, you have your marketing department, you have your tech department. You know, you have these different bodies, but together, these bodies work together as an organization to, whether it's to provide a service or build a product or whatever it may be. It's the combination of the services that allow them, they achieve this. So like to bring it down, like even like simpler, the combination of their individual skills together as a group, combined as an organization, helps do these things. So what I'm getting at is it's important that you're able to identify the differences between these bodies. If like in a lot of DAOs today, what happens is, like I said before, there is if your token, here's the token, it's the whatever token, and whatever we are voting on, this token is applicable to vote on all of it. And so it doesn't matter if this, I mean, let's say this was a DAO that incubates projects and they're voting on, there's some type of medical science or DeSci, as they call it, decentralized science project that they're looking to support. Now, there's issues here where it comes with like, do we support this? Everyone, a catch-all gets to vote, even if basically nobody that's voting it has an understanding of medical science, which is fine. They could like the idea, but they could very well lack the expertise, the knowledge to even understand if what's being proposed to them makes sense, if it works. It could sound good, like, hey man, I'm going to give you a flying car. That sounds good, but like, how's it work? And you need people who are able to identify these things and identify if it does or if it doesn't. And this is just in this one example, but so what we do with our primitives is we're just very easily, very seamlessly able to basically identify in, like, we have the multi-class tokens. So this one token can be voting weights applicable for this body of governance, whereas these tokens are able to use as voting weights over a different body. And then within these bodies, they're also able to have their own like reputation systems that are built in with like non-transferable like experience tokens in a sense. But you're able to really like go layers and layers deep, and very seamlessly, very easily identify these different pods of bodies. So whichever different like service it is that they focus on, be a tech team, you can even have different weights throughout these tokens. So within these bodies, you could also have leadership structures within those bodies. So it's like what we do here and what we're able to do for DAOs and everything is to just provide, I guess, whereas I like to see like what's going on with like Gov2, there's this really big shift in like the underlying logic of like how things work, the flow, becoming a lot more faster, a lot more efficient. But whereas what I'm talking about is really just affecting how easily people can structure their governance, their governing bodies, and things like that.
Yeah, and besides the everything that's already there implemented, we also have been exploring a lot of what makes Gov2 necessarily better than Gov1 in certain aspects, and we want to implement some changes for version 2 for our own protocols. One of those big changes we want to implement is being able to have fully customizable call filters for defining permissions that each track can execute in calls, and those would be deployed in the WebAssembly functions, which is interesting because it's not a contract per se. It's those functions wouldn't have any storage, they wouldn't have any state. They would be what we call in software engineering rule engine. They define. We have a predefined set of function signatures, and what what gets in the function, what gets out is predefined as, in this case, a Boolean. It's either true or false. Either you have permission to execute that, or you don't. And that allows us to have users make up custom functions for their DAOs, where they can customize everything down to logic using the call arguments. So, for example, instead of just saying this track can't execute balance transfers, instead of that, we can have wasm submitted rules that say this track can only submit balance transfers if they do balance transfers below X amount. Or we can have fully customizable things. We can only do XCM calls if it's to this pair chain, et cetera, et cetera. It gets very customizable with that. And another thing we want to have integrated is right now our governance system is based in multisigs, specifically only multisigs. We want to expand that to so that users have the ability to choose if they want to have multisig voting system or if they want to have a more governance-like voting system with A's and A's instead of just voting to execute, which would make this more akin to proper governance. And it's not like it doesn't have the full power, but that would allow people to build more complicated and more fuller systems of government inside of these DAOs.
Beautiful. Thank you to the InvArch team, Dakota and Gabe, for answering that last question. I think, at least for me personally, this was a very intuitive question series on Web3 governance, Gov2, and how InvArch has a very significant role. It's now time to open up the floor to our awesome audience who would like to ask any questions they may have for our speakers. So to ask your question, request to speak by tapping on the request icon, and we'll let you on stage.
And then also just want to say, thank you, Joe. Really awesome. This was, in my opinion, don't tell him I said this, but you were able to break down governance, I think, in a more digestible way than, let's say, the keynote address a couple months ago. So I really appreciate you coming up here to explain that to everyone, just because, again, it's really important that people not just be aware of what's going on, but understand why and the significance of what's going on, the reason behind it, decentralization over the network, and just, again, knowing how these things work.
Yeah, no worries. I was happy to participate. Just a heads up, I probably only have 10 minutes for audience questions, but can stick around another 10.
Okay, fine. Say, are there any questions, Jay?
No requests yet.
I'll say if you do have, because I know I originally told you it'd be an hour, so it's running past that now. Say if you do have something upcoming, and if someone does have a question, feel free to take this opportunity now. But otherwise, I don't want to hold you up or anything like that, or at least try and give you a breather before you got to go jump into the next thing.
Alrighty, I think everyone in the audience has an understanding, at least from today's Tinker Talks. To end off today's episode, we'll have final words to the audience from our speakers. Starting with, actually, we have one request. My apologies. Blinken, you can go ahead.
Hey, how's everybody doing today?
Hey, how are you?
Pretty good. I just have one question. I know that with the repository and everything, that people are going to be able to use the tech across, or at least this is the impression I'm under from what I've heard. People are going to be able to use your tech across different blockchains, and I was just wondering if when people deposit their tech to the repository, if Polkadot will be able to use their tech.
Wait, my bad. Let me just make sure I'm understanding. So when you say if someone were to let's say mint have a repository on GitArch, for example,
yes, sir,
would Polkadot? So okay, great question. Ideally in the future, I want to because in the scope you're saying people from GitArch could technically you could in the future technically like actually push or manage like everything from runtime upgrades like all through GitArch, hypothetically speaking, which is something that is on my mind, and talk about that more with people from Parity. We have some talks on that, but all that aside, regarding like in the future, I would like to see when there are more code bases stored on GitArch, like technically speaking, anything that's stored there, anyone will be able to access and use it all in the same way that things are using GitHub. Like there's not going to be any change there. But if you're talking about like creating a trust, some type of like an automated or trustless system that interacted with these code bases and Polkadot, then regarding, let's say if it was Polkadot's code base, it would preferably need to be stored on GitArch or on InvArch. But the quick answer is yes. It just depends on, like, I guess, like how, to what degree do you mean like interact with? Like, if you wouldn't mind, like if you explained like what would you like to do maybe, and I can like kind of break down whether or not that would be sooner or maybe later possible.
No, I mean, it was more of like a real general question. I mean, how you just explained it was pretty much what I wanted to hear. It's like, yes, that's a possibility that the text can be mixed up and everything. I'm not enough of a technically minded person to actually put it into words that would probably make sense in terms of the context of what you're asking right now.
As I say, it's like, well, touching on Gov2, there's like the Polkadot Fellowship, and then shout out to Gabe because he did get accepted. I'm just proud of him. But so there's Polkadot Fellowship, and one of the things that like when Gavin Wood had shared about it, one of the things like I quoted it and shared myself was just talking about the possibility that the entire fellowship could be entirely run on chain on GitArch. And in this case, then it would be truly censorship resistant, like a truly unstoppable program, to where like you hypothetically wouldn't have to worry about someone waking up, going on to GitHub, and either something censored, or like let's say, God forbid, if Gavin's account all right, ever gets pulled from GitHub, I'm just saying we're in a lot of trouble, because like a lot of data goes missing when that happens. So yeah, we can just entirely avoid those futures with things like this. I talked about it. I tweeted about it. Somebody liked it, but I'm not going to brag. But yeah. Well, there's a lot of stuff that we got planned with GitArch and onboarding all these code bases. But in our vision, and technically speaking, everything can be fully like seamless, interoperable, and work together. And since it's possible, it's our vision to realize that.
Yeah, I mean, from Polkadot's point of view, like anything that compiles to WASM can be run on Polkadot. So it doesn't really matter like where it's stored or hosted. Like as long as you can compile it to WASM and connect it to a chain, whether it's like as a runtime or a smart contract or however you want to do it. Like if it's in WASM, then Polkadot can execute it. And like as for the fellowship and like GitHub, yeah, I mean the stuff on GitHub is definitely like a seeding of the fellowship, but it's definitely an on-chain collective, and like the membership and kind of everything about it should be run on-chain. So hopefully the risk of GitHub and the fellowship is a very short-lived one.
And I just want to side note, like we don't hate GitHub. Just if anyone ever thinks, but what we do hate is like some of the more recent things that we've seen, like regarding ownership and censorship and things like that. Because GitArch was something that we had been cooking up prior to like the Tornado Cast stuff, so that was more a moment of validation. But like our big focus here is on like just the code ownership and making sure, even in the sense of just, I guess you could even say like record keeping, almost like the significance. There's a lot of dependencies and you want things to be unstoppable. I think that's important for sustainability. But yeah, a big thing of this is just providing an environment where things can exist and just really honestly, whether it's being used or whatever, but ultimately just have a place where they can be preserved no matter what.
Great stuff. Thank you for that question, Blinken. And no one else has requested to speak or to ask a question. But to end things off, if we can have some final statements from our speakers today, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll go quick. Just yeah, thanks for having me. Always good to participate in this kind of stuff, and yeah, thanks for hosting.
So I just want to say thank you again, Joe, for joining us today. Really grateful. Very, very insightful as well. Thank you. I know you're busy, and I do appreciate this. For those who don't know, again, Joe from the Web3 Foundation, a really strong reputation in the past with his work on common good paradigms, but obviously very active in a lot of things going over there and with governance. So I really appreciate you coming on. So thank you very, very much to Joe, and just to our audience. I just want to say thank you to everyone who tuned in. It's been an amazing past month. We got a lot more to go, though. We have a lot that we're going to be delivering on and shipping out here soon. So we're really excited to bring these to the forefront so we can get to the point where we can stop explaining and people can start using. We're looking forward to that. Yeah, we're just excited. So thank you to everyone who came out. Tinker LBP starts this week. But be smart and don't ape in at the beginning and not financial advice, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, that's all I got. If you want to say something, Gabe, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to thank you all for being here, being interested in what we're building. As a builder, that's the best thing. Best thing for us is being able to see that the community cares about what we're building. So thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much to our audience today for joining us. And this is AJ signing off. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. See you guys.
Thanks. See you guys.
Bye bye.